Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are continuing our series of messages on the Tabernacle of Moses, and this will be part 3. And we will be looking at the outer court in this lesson. But before we get to this outer court, I did want to mention something that I forgot to mention last lesson, dealing with the arrangement of the children of Israel and the priests around the tabernacle as they were traveling in the wilderness when they would set up their tents. That the numbers that I gave, the numbers in Numbers chapter 1 and Numbers chapter 2 of the children of Israel, and for each tribe there were a certain specific number given, that those numbers are dealing with the men of each tribe. So it doesn't mention the women and the children. And for example, if a tribe had 150,000, that 150,000 dealt specifically with the men of that tribe, the warriors of that tribe. So it didn't account for the women and also the children if they were married. But still, generally, we do know that. So there was a lot more people than just those numbers that were given there. Of course, we don't know how many of the men were married and how many children they had, and the priests also. We don't know how many of them were married and children. So there was a tremendous amount of people. If a tribe had, for example, 150,000, we don't know how many of that 150,000 were married. Let's say 100,000, and how many had children. So a tribe that had 150,000 in it, could end up being 300,000 or over 300,000. That kind of thing. So I did want to mention, I forgot to mention it last lesson, but I do want to clarify that those numbers given on that chart that I showed deal with the men, the warriors in the of the children of Israel. All right. If you want, you can read Numbers chapter 1 and Numbers chapter 2, and you'll see, you'll understand. So now the outer court is in Exodus chapter 27. And starting at verse 9, and you know what? Let's read that. It's from 9 to verse 19, and it says, "And thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle for the south side southward. There shall be hangings for the court of fine linen and of fine twined linen of 100 cubits long for one side, and the 20 pillars thereof, and their 20 sockets shall be of brass. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver. And likewise for the north side in length there shall be hangings of 100 cubits long, and his 20 pillars and their sockets, their 20 sockets of brass, the hooks of the pillars and their fillets of silver. And for the breadth of the court on the west side shall be hangings of 50 cubits, their pillars 10, and their sockets 10. And the breadth of the court on the east side, eastward, shall be 50 cubits. The hangings of one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And on the other side shall be hangings 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And for the gates of the court shall be an hanging of 20 cubits of blue, and of purple, and of scarlet, and fine twined linen, wrought with needlework, and their pillars shall be 4, and their sockets 4. All the pillars round about the court shall be filleted with silver, their hooks shall be of silver, and their sockets of brass. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 everywhere. And the height 5 cubits of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass. All the vessels of the tabernacle, in all the service thereof, and all the pins thereof, and all the pins of the court shall be of brass. Now, that's the outer court. Now, the dimensions are seen in verse 18, and it says, the length of the court shall be 100 cubits. So the length of the court is 150 feet long. A cubit is 1.5 feet. And the breadth 50 cubits. So it's 150 feet long, 75 feet wide. And then it says, and the height 5 cubits of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass. So the height of the linen that went around the tabernacle was 7 feet high. So it was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and the height of the outer court, the height of the linen was 7 feet high. All right. Now, the materials used, we see the first part, we see the hangings were made of fine twined linen in verse 9. So it says here that the hanging that went around the court was of fine twined linen. The gate that was on the east side was made of blue, of purple, scarlet, and fine twined linen. Okay? So, the hangings, the general hangings that went all around the court were of fine twined linen. But there was a gate on the east side, and that gate was made of blue, purple, scarlet, and fine twined linen. Now, the pillars, according to Exodus chapter 36 and verse 36, it seems, it's believed that the pillars, the posts that the curtains were hung on, were made of shittim wood. All right, shittim wood. Now, the sockets, which is what the posts were put into, on the ground you would put a socket, and then in the socket you would put a post. So, the sockets, which the pillars fit into, were made of brass. In verse 17 here, okay, it says, all the pillars round about the court shall be filleted with silver, and their hooks and their sockets of brass. So the socket that the pillar fit into was made of brass. And the hooks which the curtains were fastened to, and the rods which supported the curtains were made of silver in verse 17, okay? So the hanging, you had the hangings, so there were hooks and sockets and things that the hangings had to fit into, all right, be supported by. So, and then lastly, each pillar was supported by cords, okay? You had a cord, like a tent, you had a cord that went down from the pillar. It would go down, and it was pegged into the ground, all right? So the cords, which were fastened to pins of brass. So in Exodus chapter 35, verse 18, and also in 27, verse 19, the very last verse that we read, verse 19 says, all the vessels of the tabernacle, in all the service thereof, and all the pins. Now the pins is like what we would call today a tent stake. You would bang it into the ground to support the tent. There were cords that went from the pillars down, and they were pegged into the ground, all right? It says, and all the pins thereof, and all the pins of the court shall be of brass. So there were brass pins that held these cords, all right? Now, it is not told, anywhere in the Bible, it is not told what the cords were made of. All right? The cords. They're the cords that supported the pillars. each shittim wood pillar that would supported it, like a tent peg, all right? And also, so we don't know exactly what those cords were made of. Now, let's go into the meaning of these materials. Now, the fine twine linen of the hangings were made all around the court, 7 feet high. There was all around the court. There was this fine twine linen. And fine twine linen speaks of God's righteousness. And in Revelation chapter 19 and verse 8, fine linen represents the righteousness of the saints. The righteousness of the saints. All right? Revelation chapter 19 verse 8. God's righteousness imputed to the saints. So it's fine twine linen speaks of the righteousness of God. All right? When a person would approach the tabernacle, the first thing that they would meet would be the righteousness and the holiness of God. As a person passes through the gate, remember there's only one entrance, it's the gate. As they pass through the gate and they enter into and they are surrounded by the righteousness of God. So when a priest would enter through the gate into the outer court, they are surrounded. They are in the outer court. They're surrounded by the righteousness of God. And when a person gets saved today in our world, when a person gets saved, the first thing God does is he imputes to them what? His righteousness. When a person would go to the brazen altar and they would get saved, they would sacrifice and they would come to the altar and give their heart to Christ. They enter into the outer court and now they're surrounded by the righteousness of God, and God imputes to each person his righteousness. All right? Now let's go to the gate. The gate, which represents Jesus Christ as the door, was made of blue. Blue always represents heaven. It was made of purple, which represents royalty. And it also was included in scarlet, which represents the blood of Christ. And then fine twine linen, which we just said, it represents the righteousness of God. That Jesus Christ, he is the righteous one. So all these things that is made of the gate, that is made of the gate. In fact, the gate was, let me see here now. The gate is in verse 16. It says here, and for the gate of the court shall be an hanging of 20 cubits of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen wrought with needlework. And so all these things are a representation of Jesus Christ and who he is. John chapter 10 verse 7 says, then said Jesus unto them again, verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. Verse 9, Jesus said, I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. Jesus Christ is the gate. He's the door. And we enter in through him. That's why it's blue. That's why it's purple. It's not just fine twined linen. It's scarlet, the blood of Christ. He is the gate. Then we have the hooks and the rods. The hooks and the rods which supported the curtain. Because you have a curtain, and the curtain has to hang from something, and it has to be supported by something. Well, the hooks and the rods supported by the curtain, the righteousness of, remember, so the curtain, which represents the righteousness of God, is supported by something. And They were made, the hooks and the rods were made of silver, which speaks of redemption. Silver always represents redemption. So, because of redemption, we have God's righteousness imputed to us. So we have a curtain that's made of, that represents the righteousness of God. And that righteousness was made possible and is supported by redemption, by silver, all right? And then you have the sockets. The socket is what the post, the shittim wood post fit into. The socket was a huge piece, and it went on the ground. And then you would put this socket on the ground, and then you would put the post into it. And then you would you'd tie your post down to the ground. All right? So, the sockets and the pins, remember the tent pegs, the pins that went into the ground, the socket and the pins were made of brass. And brass always speaks of judgment. The brazen altar, the brazen serpent in the wilderness always speaks of judgment. So, the redemption of God and the imputed righteousness of God is supported and made possible because of the judgment of Jesus Christ on the cross. Remember, the one thing that touches the earth is the brass. The socket and the pins, they're made of brass. That's where it all begins. Everything begins at the brass, at the judgment of God. Jesus Christ was judged for us. Judgment begins it, and then you have the shittim wood post, and then the silver. So remember, it's judgment. Judgment is God's righteousness, and God's redemption is made possible because of God's judgment. Supported. Everything is God's judgment, God's righteousness and God's redemption is supported by His judgment on Christ. All right? It all begins with Christ, His judgment. Therefore, all the materials that make up the curtain for the outer court speaks thoroughly of God's work of salvation. The whole curtain around the court speaks completely of God's salvation towards man. And from the cross, which is judgment, right? The brass speaks of the cross, God's judgment. From the cross to redemption to imputed righteousness. From brass to silver to fine twined linen. Remember, it starts at brass. Then it goes to silver. Then it goes to the fine twined linen. All right? Now, I want to finish this lesson with the pegs that go in the ground. This is very interesting. In Exodus chapter 27, verse 19, it says, "And all the vessels of the tabernacle, in all the service thereof, and all the what? And all the pins, and all the pins of the court shall be of brass." All right? They shall be of brass. And then in Exodus 39, verse 40, the gate also, the gate that was in front, the entrance to the tabernacle had curtain. It also was supported. It was a curtain supported by these tent pegs. All right? Pegs and cords. So not only the main curtain around the tabernacle was supported by these pegs, but also the gate was supported by these pegs. All right? Now, the Hebrew word is yathed. Y-A-T-H-E-D. I don't know how it's pronounced in Hebrew, but it's yathed. And it means a pin or a stake. It means a nail. It's again, same thing. Like a tent peg. You have your tent, you put it up, and you put your cords down, and then you pin it. Those pegs are what we're talking about, all right? Now, in First Chronicles. Let's turn to First Chronicles. First Chronicles chapter 22. First Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 3. First Chronicles 22 let's read verse 2. And David commanded to gather together the strangers that were in the land of Israel, and he set masons to hew wrought stones to build the house of God. Now, verse 3, and David prepared iron in abundance. Okay, here. He prepared iron in abundance for what? For the nails. For the nails, for the doors of the gates, and for the joinings and brass in abundance without weight. So, in 1 Chronicles 22, verse 3, David was talking about preparing to build the temple of God. All right? Now, David prepares iron nails for the temple of Solomon, for Solomon's temple. All right? He's preparing this material, and he prepares iron nails. All right? Now, 1,000 years later, 1,000 years after 1 Chronicles 22, verse 3, 1,000 years later, at the very same site, listen, at the very same site, just outside of the city walls of Jerusalem, Jesus would what? Jesus Christ would be nailed to a cross. Interesting, isn't it? That was exciting. 1,000 years later, after David, right in the very same spot where Jesus Christ was going to be nailed with iron nails to a cross, David was preparing nails for Solomon's temple. Hebrews chapter 8. Let's read this. This is interesting. Hebrews chapter 8. Hebrews chapter 8 verses 1 and 2 says, Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle. Listen now. And of the true tabernacle, which the Lord what? Pitched. Which the Lord pitched. He pitched and not man. God pitched something. Now, watch. Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 verse 23 says, Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, you have taken and by wicked hands have what? Have crucified. This is interesting. Crucified and slain. So, you have him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, you have taken by wicked hands, and by those wicked hands you have what? Crucified and slain. Now, the Greek words in Hebrews 8 verse 2 for the Lord pitched. It says the Lord pitched, and the Greek word, the Greek word for the Lord pitched, and also the Greek word for in Acts 2:23 for you nailed, right? You nailed is pegnoumi. Pegnoumi, all right? And it's pegnoumi. Jesus Christ was nailed or pitched on the cross. He was nailed or pitched to the cross, all right? And as the pegs and the cords secured the tabernacle against harsh weather, so also Jesus Christ is our stability in this world because of being nailed to the cross, right? The tabernacle, the the hangings around the tabernacle were supported by these poles of shittim wood, and these poles were supported by ropes and pegged nails, right? Same thing. And as the tabernacle, as these nails helped support the tabernacle, because out in the wilderness, there's wind, there's maybe sandstorms happen, these nails help to support the tabernacle from falling down, the curtains from falling down. And so also, Jesus Christ was nailed to the cross. And because of him being nailed to the cross, it gives us stability in our life that we can weather the storms of this world, the storms of our life. Jesus Christ was nailed to the cross. Saint Pegnumi, all right? I want to finish with this here. Backsliders. We'll finish very quickly with this. You know, the outer court is where backsliders roam around. They are not in. The outer court is you're not in the holy place yet. We'll get to that in a few lessons. It's not the holy place. The holy place is where true worship of God takes place. But backsliders are not in the holy place, where the candlestick, where the altar of incense, where the table of showbread is. They're not there. They're not there where the Ark of the Covenant is, worshiping God in true worship of him. They're not there. They're outside of that. They're in the outer court, roaming around. All right? They are not in the holy place, fellowshipping with God, and they do not pass through the gate back into this world, because that would imply then that they would lose salvation. A backslider does not pass past the brazen altar, through the gate, back out into the world again. No. If that happened, then that would imply that a person could lose their salvation. But no, once a person passes through, they apply the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to their heart at the brazen altar, and they enter into and are surrounded by the righteousness of Almighty God. They are in the outer court. And now God wants them to go to the laver and to wash and to enter into true worship of him in the holy place. They wander in the outer court with their feet in the dust of this world and having no fellowship with God. And that's what the outer court represents. It's where backsliders can go, and they don't want to be something happens in their life, a test or a trial. And maybe they were in the holy place at one time, and they were worshiping God, and they were in love with his word, and they were fellowshipping with him, but something might have happened, and they slipped out of the holy place back into the outer court. And now their feet are wandering in the dust of this world, and they're not in worshiping God anymore. They're out in the dust. Are they still saved? Absolutely. They're still surrounded by the curtains, by the righteousness of God. They're still there, but they're out in the world now. Their feet are connected to this world system. In order for a backslider to return to fellowship with God, they need to cleanse themselves at the laver first, and then enter into fellowship with God. A backslider they just can't barge back into the holy place and say, here I am again. Or no, you have to go to the laver first before you can go into the holy place. And when a Christian decides that they don't want to be close to God anymore, something happens and they back away from God, and they enter back into this world system. They're in the outer court, floating around out in the outer court, just roaming and looking at the stars and looking at whatever. And they're not inside worshiping God. In order for them to get back into fellowship with God, they need to go to the laver. They have to go to the laver to be washed and cleansed by the word of God. And then they can enter into the holy place and have fellowship and worship him in truth. All right? Until next lesson on the tabernacle of Moses. Walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.